Blog Talk Radio.
Well, here we are, ladies and gentlemen. If it's Tuesday, it must be the Cleveland Sports Podcast. That's right, hosted by my good friend, Peter Ray. 347-205-9631, the call-in number. Yours truly, Mark Mancini, producing it. It goes by so quick, so catch the archive on blogtalkradio.com/Mancini Sports. Podcast platforms powered now by Mancini Media. And then right after this show, at the top of the next hour, Philadelphia will come front and center with Mike Paternoster and Damian McGlynn. And their special guest will be Jim the Rookie Morris. So a lot of good things. And as I lay down the red carpet, put the podium in its place, hand off the mic. Peter, first of all, how are you? Second of all, how can people get a hold of you? Third of all, you got a great guest yourself, my friend.
The famous three questions. Yes, Mark, I'm doing well. I have a YouTube channel. It's my name, Peter J. Ray, R-E-A, and I have a website, Adventures in History with Peter J. Ray at peterjray.com. You're absolutely right. Tonight we have a tremendous guest. He's a multi-level basketball reporter, analyst, and podcast host. It's our honor and privilege to have on the show tonight Mr. DeShaun Tate. Welcome to the show, Mr. Tate.
No, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate you sharing this space with me. Overly thankful, grateful, and appreciative of that, and ready to talk some basketball, that's for sure.
Right. Now, you first of all, can you tell us about yourself, about your work as a reporter, analyst, and podcast host?
Yeah, absolutely. I've covered in the NBA, particularly and specifically for the Atlanta Hawks over the course of the last 5 years, and as well as all types of local based out of Atlanta, local Georgia, Georgia Tech, Georgia State, as well as regional in the ACC, SEC, and national. I guess I probably should have led with that. So definitely gets really busy around this time of the year, as you can imagine, with March Madness after we kind of put away all that football stuff that everybody loves and talks about so much. And as far as I'm a podcast host, I like to call it the best, the most entertaining, the most informational, and the most educational basketball content on the planet in the form of a podcast. It's called Tate's Take. You find it anywhere you find your favorite podcast, and we stream live on YouTube as well as on Periscope and on Facebook as well. So you can follow along on social media, all social media platforms at Tate's Take Hoops, TATES, We like to call it where basketball lives.
Very good, wonderful. So, Mr. Tate, what is your favorite decade of NBA history?
I think I'm probably about 50-50 even on the 80s and 90s, I want to say. I love that brand a little bit more. I know some people feel a little bit differently than I do with this current basketball that we see now, or some of the players. Some people say, well, the players are better now than they were then, but I like the mentalities. I like the brand, how a lot of the players kind of hung their hats on the defensive side of the ball. I kind of grew up more of a defensive type of guy, Midwest type of gritty and grimy and rugged basketball. That's the way that I've always kind of embraced it. And that's 80s and 90s, a good balance of physicality, mentalities, skill sets, hunger, the whole nine.
Yeah, it's interesting because the NBA started, I think, in 1946, and then it wasn't real popular, but they had the tremendous Celtics teams in the 50s with Bill Russell and won all these titles, and then the big Lakers Celtics rivalry got going in the 60s, and the Celtics were winning every time. And then in the 70s, okay, things with, of course, TV comes in, you got the ABA. And then, in the 80s with Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, and again, the Celtics-Lakers rivalry. And then, of course, the 90s with Michael Jordan. So do you want to talk about talk about Magic Johnson and Larry Bird and that whole drama with those two fellows and their teams playing each other for titles?
Absolutely. With it all starting in 1979 with Michigan State and Indiana State rather. I just believe that that was setting the standard, the precedence of basketball at that time, and of course I think that it added a little different of a dimension with one guy who's African American being from Lansing, Michigan, where I'm actually from and am currently at right now. And then the other guy, a Caucasian coming from French Lick, Indiana, having no idea where that is, but I tell you what, taking some of my time to actually travel up through that state and seeing as flat as it was, a lot of people, it's boring and this and that. I particularly like going up through there because you get the opportunity to have a good feel for tradition, historic basketball. Everybody's got a hoop or a goal in their driveway. I love it. And so that created a little bit of a rivalry. And to now see that those guys are, good friends to this day, I think is amazing. But I do believe that it developed developing a bond and a chemistry of the game that we know it to be today.
Yeah, when LeBron James left Cleveland, went to L.A., and of course they have this tremendous. It really hurt me and the folks here, but anyway, that's life. And he of course the Lakers, the tremendous history of the Lakers, and all these. And then I think the other thing that was tough to deal was the fact they had Magic Johnson, who's probably the nicest, funniest, just a wonderful human being. How do you say no to Magic Johnson, right?
No, seriously, yeah, a guy with just a really big heart, a big, beautiful, bright smile. Everybody loved it and this and that. Where I feel like it was a little bit different with Larry Bird, where maybe it wasn't nearly about as many smiles and so forth, but the demeanor that he kind of brought to the game of his own as kind of being like a silent killer, kind of like an assassin. And so when you have a nice balance between two guys that bring different things to the game but are both clearly really skilled in the top 50 of the greatest players to ever play this game, and that's honestly an understatement. I thought that it just brought forth a really beautiful brand. And it even did some things culturally, I like to think, no matter what shade of a complexion that you are, and got no matter who you are or where you come from, to be able to learn how to appreciate this game and how different people can still be, yet still sharing one equal goal and passion, and that's to not only win a championship, but to bring smiles to the faces of the people who love this game so much, all the way back to when it was created by Dr. James Naismith on December 21st, 1891 in Lawrence, Kansas, I feel like.
I think it was in Springfield, Massachusetts. But
okay.
Well, I'm not exactly clear on that, but that's what. But anyway, yeah, it does go back, and I like the fact that you brought out. You said the 80s and 90s because I think those were the decades that made basketball what it is today. Because then now moving into the 90s, Michael Jordan and the Bulls, six titles in 8 years, and that whole and that's when it seemed like NBA really went international, and Jordan just became such this incredible player that everybody knows about. And do you want to talk about the 90s, Michael Jordan and the Bulls?
Absolutely. That was it's crazy to say this, and I don't know, hopefully I don't get judged too much for it, but that's one of the closest things to perfection that I think I've ever seen in my life was Michael Jordan. Everybody wanted to be like Michael. So like right now where you see it, everybody wants to, if you go and watch little kids growing up or playing in rec ball or whatever, everybody wants to step out and shoot threes. Why? Because of Stephen Curry. You've got your LeBron moments as well. You've got your times when everybody wanted to kind of go the route of turnaround fadeaway, kind of like doing the Kobe, everybody doing the Kobe thing. But it originated, I feel like, where everybody wanted to be like one guy, and that was like Michael Jordan. Guys going to the basket with the tongue out type deal, and I'm not sure how many guys you see chewing gum playing basketball anymore, but I know at that time a lot of people wanted to really emulate that. And so while there are so many people who love LeBron James, and granted, I totally get it, but LeBron James got that number 23 from somewhere. I remember playing basketball growing up, and you were trying out for a team, and you made the team, and then they came in with a box of brand new jerseys, and you popped that box open and everybody ran over to it. Everybody was just looking through them and throwing them behind them, looking through and throwing them behind them. You went, what is everybody looking for? Everybody was looking for the uniform with the number 23 on it. That's the kind of the polarizing figure that Michael Jordan was, and just made everybody want to be like him. I just thought that did a tremendous amount for our game. And even more so, like you said, it became more global at that point. And a large reason of that is because of number 23, his airness himself.
You know, I've been a Cleveland Cavs fan going back to 1972, and then the Cavs, of course, we did win in 2016, but it's very tough in the NBA to win titles. It seems like there are very few strong contenders every year. But in the late 80s, the Cavs were a strong contender, but then they were rivals with the Detroit Pistons. And, of course, Cleveland at that time never, eventually they faded and then deteriorated and were not strong anymore. But the Pistons won 2 titles, 89 and 90. You want to talk about the so-called bad boy Pistons of 1989-1990?
Yeah, I love those teams, man. Listen, I mean, when you've got – everybody's going to always be able to talk about the Isaiah Thomas of that team, obviously Bill Laimbeer, who I really do believe, even still to this day, whether it's Draymond Green or somebody else, everyone, you've got to have that somewhat of kind of like a junkyard dog to an extent on your team, that vocal leader, a guy who's not afraid to mix it up and muck it up a little bit with the opposition. So that was obviously Laimbeer, who also had some really, a really good balance of a skill set as well, and I think a part of that is what Christian Laettner kind of, in his own way, kind of benefited from, being able to embrace that type of mentality and attitude. But even more so when you look at some of the other guys, one of the best perimeter defensive players in the NBA at that time, and even in the history of the game, Joe Dumars, who was just as good of a perimeter threat as he was on defense. Benny the Microwave Johnson, John Sally. I mean, the guy, even all the way down to some of the not as notable names. I don't know if you remember Buddha. Big Edwards in the middle, I'm not sure how many guys are walking around wearing the number 53 with handlebar mustaches anymore, but he was one of the guys that did that and established a lot in the front court, which, again, everybody's always going to talk about the key guys, but some of those role players, I feel like they had some of the best in the league at that time, and what they hung their hat on was being defensively laser-focused and, some people call it dirty basketball or whatever, what have you. Some of the greatest players, as great as we know them to be today, and I'll always love that about the Detroit Pistons.
Okay, moving on to the L.A. Lakers, 2000, 01, and 02. What a team. Shaq, Kobe, all those guys. You want to talk about those teams, those Lakers teams that were incredible?
Absolutely. Listen, those were some teams that I really feel like when you start looking at some of the best inside-outside combinations and duos in the game, the dominant force that was Shaquille O'Neal. Listen, I'm not that old. I'll be 37 later on this year. I can't tell you with seeing what I've seen with my own eyes, not something I had to go back and look at film or tape. I haven't seen a guy as dominant as Shaquille O'Neal in my life. And then you start talking about who a lot of people feel like was the second coming of Michael Jordan, in its own right, with Kobe Bryant. I mean, a young Kobe Bryant, the number 8 with the baby fro, Kobe Bryant. I mean, I loved him, and God bless his soul that, he was a guy that wanted to. One thing I always respect about him is that he wanted it so bad. A lot of other people talked about it, how much to be like Michael Jordan. We just got done having that conversation. But he was one guy that actually had the ability, and it's not even just about the fact that he had the basketball skill set, but because he actually worked towards outworking if he wasn't going to be the next coming of Michael Jordan or whatever, what have you, he was not going. It wasn't going to be because someone else outworked him to do it. I love that about him, you know. So when you start looking at some of the other guys on this team, one guy has probably more rings than anybody I know. That's Robert Horry, Big Shot Rob, who played a significant part. So there's all these different guys that you can kind of stick in and put in place into the kind of roles that they played on some of these phenomenal basketball teams. I like to look at a lot of those role players because they have just as big of a piece in some of this stuff as some of the key and more notable players.
Then a team is kind of forgotten, the Houston Rockets, 94-95, in the middle of the Jordan era, won 2 titles. You want to talk about those teams, the Houston Rockets, 94-95?
Oh, yeah, those were some really good teams. You know what, that one always kind of had me wondering because I wasn't really sure who was going to take that next step after Michael Jordan went out of retirement. We just finished talking about Big Shot Rob, who was on those teams as well. Even when you go looking at some of the other guys, obviously Hakeem Olajuwon, arguably or inarguably the best or one of the best centers that ever played this game, who isn't even from America. We can go all the way back to when he was Hakeem, drop the H, and he could just be Hakeem Olajuwon, Clyde Drexler. I mean, some of those guys, it fascinated me, not even just because of Olajuwon's footwork and things like that. I don't think any big man has ever had footwork as good as his, but some of the other guys on the team, the Mario Ellis that was on that team, the Vernon Maxwells, who was essentially that Lambeer, he was essentially that Draymond Green of that team, those type of role players, and Sam Cassell even from a point guard perspective, you know. So they had bigs, they had guys that could shoot from the outside. They had some really, really good basketball teams, and going back-to-back during a time when Michael Jordan hung it up and got ready to come back and join in again, they took full advantage of that. So you got to tip your cap and give credit to what they've been able to put together during the middle part of the 90s.
You know, another interesting team is the San Antonio Spurs because they had this, you know, they won titles 1999 and then in 05, 07. In 2014, so these spread out. I was really impressed by how they were able to, you know, maybe they weren't winning year after year, you know, several in a row, but they would continue. You want to talk about the San Antonio Spurs and their multiple, 4 titles over a span of quite a few years?
Yeah, when you start talking about dynasties, that's one of the ones that you have to start with after you talk about the Chicago Bulls because of what they've been able to put together from a standpoint of international players that have come over from other countries over here to the States and put together a winning way. Greg Popovich, inarguably one of the best coaches, and even that are still active, you know, when you start putting them in the same conversation maybe as some Coach K's and some Gino Auriemmas and Bill Belichick, I'm sure, is in that conversation as well. You know, and the longevity, going all the way from doing it from 99 in a lockout year with the Admiral and a young Tim Duncan, and then all the way up through the career and still doing it when LeBron James comes into the league and so forth. And, you know, that's where you also have to tip your cap to them because they did it, but it made me feel like they did it the right way. Now, it might have maybe not have been the most explosive firepower offense, high-powered, high offenses, and, you know, might have put quite a few people to sleep, but it always gave me a different kind of appreciation for the game, the way that they played it, because it was very fundamentally sound. It was very basic basketball, but it was so hard to stop with a lot of their players, Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili. And if I'm not mistaken, and I could be totally off base with this, but this name Big Shot Rob keeps coming up, and I feel like maybe, just maybe, he could have gotten the championship there with the San Antonio Spurs as well. So when you start looking at some of those teams, I mean, we're talking about, you know, unprecedented. You know, they're one that I will always have a deep kind of respect for because they always seem to play it the right way, and I can always embrace and appreciate when you don't have to try and stack teams up to win championships, but that you embrace the way that the front office made some of the decisions that they did through the draft to be able to make this something that went on and be as legendary for as long as it did from a longevity standpoint, talking about the Spurs.
What's your take on the LeBron James versus Michael Jordan debate?
I promised myself that I was never going to have that debate anymore because I didn't feel like it was much of a debate. But I will say enough to say that while I do believe that Michael Jordan is the greatest player of all time, I do believe that it's very likely that LeBron James will go down as the most accomplished player of all time. And those are two different things. And another thing, it's hard to compare for me personally, or maybe not hard, but something I primarily don't like to do because I don't like to take one guy who has completed his career versus another guy who's still playing and still has the time. Now, if we want to compare skill sets and different things like that, then sure, we can have that conversation. It's funny that Dennis Rodman mentioned something about Dennis Rodman mentioned something a few years ago about LeBron James and said that he could never play in our league at that time during the 90s. And as funny as I thought maybe that was, and I apologize for leaving Dennis Rodman out talking about those bad boy Pistons, and in some cases San Antonio Spurs as well as the Chicago Bulls. But I think where a lot of people got it confused, and I think that Dennis had to go back and reiterate on exactly what he meant by clarifying that it's not that LeBron James didn't have the skill set to play, but the mental toughness to be able to withstand how the game was played at that time in the league. And so in terms of just a one-on-one, that's always the confusing part, because I always like to ask people, when you're comparing a player to a player, are we talking about skill set, which I think is one thing within its own, or are we talking about resumes? And I think that that's where it becomes a little bit different. It's similar to I had a good comparison one time between Allen Iverson and Dwayne Wade. I take Allen Iverson every day of the week, but in the same token, he's not nearly as accomplished as Dwayne Wade is, and so I think that's where you kind of have to clarify for some people when you do have the conversations about comparing to a player to a player. If you take resumes out of it, then let's compare from one player's skill set versus another player's skill set, although I do also honestly have to allude to the fact that it's obviously a 5-player game, and it's not one-on-one. It's not tennis or swimming or golf or something like that. So,
okay, the Golden State Warriors, titles in 2015, 2017, and 2018. Any thoughts on those teams?
Yeah, those were, clearly some really good teams. Again, you're talking about dynasties. They're the most recent of all of the dynasties. Nobody's. I'll always be the person to say that I think that Steph Curry is the best shooter that I've ever seen. I know that there's some other guys that are in some conversations along with that, but I'll say enough to say that, when you have Kevin Durant, and for crying out loud, there were some championships that were won before Kevin Durant was ever a Golden State Warrior. So with that being said, you have to start factoring in guys like the Draymond Green, who I don't think you can win a championship without having the things that he had contributed to. And then you also have to look at Klay Thompson, who's one of the better shooters that this game has seen. Maybe not as much all-around scorers, but certainly shooters that this game has ever seen. And, that one thing that impressed me so much about that was the fact that it was very much like the San Antonio Spurs, where a lot of their players were drafted there, and they had to develop a chemistry between all of them, and that's a very difficult thing to do, let alone to continue to win the way that they did. And so I have to credit Mark Jackson for much of establishing that. But in addition to that, obviously, Steve Kerr taking over, there's no way that you can just automatically assume and start giving, championship rings out without adding somebody like a Steve Kerr to be able to assist in that particular department as a head coach.
Who do you think is going to be in the finals this year?
Oh, boy, that's going to be a tough one. I don't know. Everybody's everybody's yapping about the Brooklyn Nets, and while I think that is a strong possibility, I guess, considering the fact that they're in the Eastern Conference, I think that I can see the Lakers getting there. I think that the Lakers will go back. I'm not sure who they'll face. I know that they're going to have their work cut out for them all over again, and I'll be really interested to see where things are going to go in terms of when we're up against the trade deadline, and obviously the second half of the NBA looks a lot different after the All-Star break than it does, during this point leading up to it. But right now, if I had to say, I mean, how dare we cut out the Utah Jazz with the way that they're playing right now? It's kind of hard to kind of overlook them, although I'm not really sure if they'll be able to sustain it. I mean, in the East right now, I mean, I hate to sound like someone that you can ask anybody else and they'll probably tell you the same thing. There's definitely some defensive deficiencies with the Nets right now, particularly in the front court, but I can't go against everything that I've seen so far right now between the Nets and the Lakers, but so much of that can change it up. Don't take that one to the sports book, I can tell you that.
Well, it's pretty tough to have a crystal ball because, the Golden State Warriors just seem like an unbeatable team, and now it's all gone. It's like, whoa, what happened, and then so that's why it's kind of hard to how would anybody know the future?
Yeah, no, nobody knows, and I'm sure that we're going to see some shakeups as well between some of these rosters and the way that things are going to look totally different, on the second half of the season. So it's going to be tough, for any of these teams, for all of the teams, because, listen, the Lakers have the target on their back just as much as probably the Utah Jazz or any other teams, but there are some teams that I think are more than capable of making, a run. The New Orleans Pelicans, I think, can find a way to maybe put some things together. Maybe Lonzo Ball might be on the chopping block at that point and see what it is that they can put together. And then even on the Eastern Conference side, you've got some teams that are playing pretty good. I'd like to see the Atlanta Hawks find a way to, get their legs from up under them a little bit and live up to the expectations, if not exceed the expectations of at least getting to the playoffs and maybe, just maybe, try and win one series, as unlikely as that may seem right now. But, again, this is going to look so totally different by the time the second half of the season rolls around.
Yeah, the Hawks are another one of these teams that have been strong contenders, and then the fans are excited. I think they've had the best record, and you're just like, oh, we have the best record in the league, and then you your playoffs is something completely different, and they haven't been like many teams, and so that's been real tough for Atlanta Hawks fans over the years. But they have had strong contenders from time to time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. From time to time that they have, but I mean they got to get a little bit more defense under themselves a little bit and try and work some different things out. There's going to be some players that are could potentially not be in Hawks uniforms, and I'm not really exactly sure, especially with the young NBA that we have right now, why it's so hard to get players to come to Atlanta, considering that it's so music-driven and nightlife and entertainment-driven city. And most of the guys live there and spend so much of their time there anyways. But nonetheless, that's kind of definitely been one of the Achilles heels for an organization or for a franchise like the Atlanta Hawks, where they just can never really seem to get, involved very much in some of the more elite-level free agents.
Our guest has been DeShaun Tate, multi-level basketball reporter, analyst, and podcast host. Boy, the half hour has flown by. It's been wonderful having you on the show. Mr. Tate, do you have any final words for our audience?
Yeah, I think I've done enough talking for everybody. I really appreciate it. That probably wouldn't surprise my mom the least bit. Find me on social media, all social media platforms, at Tate's Take Hoops, TATES TAKEHOOPS. Again, we like to call it Where Basketball Lives. And that's where you can find the multi-level basketball podcast. We talk high school basketball, college basketball, a ton of it, especially around this time of the year. We start getting closer to NBA playoffs, things like that, and international basketball. If they're rolling around in wheelchairs, we talk wheelchair basketball too. So you can find that anywhere that you find your favorite podcast. That's iTunes, Google Podcasts, Red Circle, Spotify, Stitcher. Anywhere you find your favorite podcast is where you can find Tate's Take, and I appreciate every subscriber, and I appreciate you for allowing me to share this platform or share this platform with me to be able to talk a little bit of basketball with you.
Oh, it's been wonderful having you on the show tonight, Mr. DeShaun Tate. God bless you, and keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. God bless, and I'll talk to you on the next one around. Looking forward to next time.
Very good. Next week, our guest will be Steve Cohen, who's a Los Angeles sports guy. Dear listener, may the road rise to meet you. May the wind be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face, and rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Good night, everybody. Thanks again, Mr. Tate.
Absolutely, no problem. Thank you for having me.
Sure thing. Very good.